This episode of The Construction Record is brought to you by the Greater Toronto Sewer and Water Main Contractors Association. Clean water, our goal, our future.
Hello and welcome to the Construction Record Podcast. I'm digital media editor Warren Frey.
I'm staff writer Russell Hixson.
And we've both had pretty busy weeks. I've done everything from technology to wood, and wood is also technology. But Russell, what have you been doing?
Well, I've been working on a few things. I wrote a story about the city of Calgary's Mayor's Urban Design Awards. I think they do it every 2 years. And I got the chance to talk to one of the judges. Her name is Kathy Lemon. She's the editor-in-chief of Calgary's Avenue magazine.
Okay.
And she kind of explained how over the years, with the awards that they've added, because there is a national urban design awards, but Calgary's, they kind of tailor it to the city of Calgary.
How so? Like, what's unique about Calgary that they're...
Well, they have an award called the Mawson, which is named after one of the first urban designers in the city.
Okay.
They also have what's called the City Edge Development Award, because not all design in Calgary is urban, because they're kind of in the prairies, right? So a lot of it is kind of a mix of like urban and kind of suburban and a little bit rural. And so they have an award to kind of celebrate those designs that are more on the edge of the city that aren't so strictly urban like you might see in Toronto or Vancouver, right? And one project that was really cool that she talked about and she really liked was it's called the West Eau Claire Park. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right. The West Eau Claire Park.
Eau Claire? Like French?
Yeah.
Okay.
Eau Claire.
Eau Claire is probably closer.
And
French people, don't write it.
Yeah. So Kathy kind of explained that it's just a really good example of something that's beautiful but also really functional. It's a part of the city right on the Bow River, and it was devastated by floods a few years back, and they need to redevelop it. And rather than just build some ugly flood mitigation project that's just concrete and gross or dirt, they decided to make something that's really beautiful and really functional with bike paths and like a terrace and a garden and all these cool things, but also all those design elements are functional flood mitigation pieces.
Good. That's cool.
Yeah, and it's really well used by the public. Like they have a flood wall with a bench, a raised promenade, a cycle path, and step terraces, and those all help mitigate floods. They have something called the Delta Garden, which is like a flood barrier, and it's integrated with raised topography and planters. So it's just
rather clever.
Yeah, it's really clever, and it just, sometimes in the design or even architect community, you see these designs and they look really nice, but do people actually use them?
Yeah.
Are they actually functional? Do they actually help the city? And this is a case where it's something that's really beautiful and nice to look at, and it also
is a barrier to...
Yeah, it's going to save potentially lives and a lot of property. So I think another project that I worked on, I talked to Beedie Development, and this piece should be out within a week or so. And they have kind of a striking new marketing campaign that they're doing. So they've noticed that their sales for kind of industrial warehouses have been lagging a bit, and they explain that a lot of companies in Alberta, with the economic slump, are a lot more cautious about spending than they normally would be, and so to encourage the sale of some of their industrial warehouse projects, they're offering $0 down to buy. And they're marketing this with the kind of a post-election ire campaign about, Trudeau can't balance his budget, but you can.
I mean, that's kind of pandering, but yeah.
I think they're just kind of tapping into what they see as like a lot of frustration in the middle of the country, especially after the federal election, where you saw them overwhelmingly kind of vote against Trudeau, and facing the years-long economic slump that just keeps continuing. People are frustrated.
Don't get me wrong, it is a good marketing campaign. It is tapping into a sentiment that's already there, which is what most marketing campaigns are working on do. So
yeah, and also they talked about how obviously they're frustrated politically, but they're also, and maybe not Beedie directly, but he was speaking generally about people in Alberta, not specifically the company. But he also said, and I talked to a guy named Jordan Dawson. He heads up their kind of industrial development division, and he was talking to me about how they're also just sick of negative stories about Alberta, and every story that comes out of there is just so doom and gloom, and it's so hard and it's so rough. And he's frustrated, and a lot of other people are frustrated because there's a lot of good things happening in the province, and those stories often don't get as much ink in the paper as kind of some of these more negative ones. And so he just kind of wants to see some more positive stories, and they're hoping to help businesses get more, invest more in warehouse space and hopefully grow and be more successful. I also wrote up something I saw from the BC Construction Association. It's a new tool that they've launched to help people purchase homes. And what's interesting about this is it's really specific to, well, it could be applied to a lot of other places, but I know a major issue in the city of Vancouver and just in the Metro Vancouver area in general is you have a lot of people working in the trades, skilled workers, and they have full-time jobs, they make good money, and they can't afford to live where they work. They got to live, in Chilliwack, Langley, Maple Ridge, and then drive out to North Vancouver or something to do a contracting job or to work for a major company. And I think that there's a lot of frustration that people have to, they're being pushed further and further away from their job. And so the BCCA is launching what's called an MIC, a Mortgage Investment Corporation. And this is an impact investment mortgage investment corporation. It's the first of its kind in Canada, and the goal of it will be to provide affordable mortgages to skilled workers.
Okay.
Not just trades workers, other workers as well. But they've been working on this for a long time. They got the University of Victoria's Business School to do a capstone project for its MBA program that they helped flesh the whole idea out as well, and it should launch next spring. And they're looking for investment right now, and it'll be interesting to track that and see how that goes. It's just kind of an interesting solution to a really common problem.
Yeah, it's kind of a missing link, really, too. Like, we need skilled workers, but they can't afford to live here. What do we do to build the stuff that we need that they can't afford to live in?
Yeah, because more and more, a lot of work is available, but you just can't live in the community where you work because it's just they're priced out. Even making very good
money,
good wages, very good money, and it's frustrating because I think the industry always is advertising, "Hey, come work as a skilled trades worker. You're going to make great money. You're going to have a really good job, a really good life."
And none of that's untrue, except for this.
Except it's like, well, the amount of money you would have to make to live in North Vancouver, West Vancouver, or downtown Vancouver is outrageous. So it's frustrating. So they're going to try and help some of these people. So that should be cool to see how that goes.
Cool. I've been to a bunch of different events. One of them I went to yesterday was the, yesterday being Tuesday, sorry, listeners. One of them being Procore has these things they do all over North America, and this is the first one they did in Canada in Burnaby, actually right down the street from us. They're sort of Connectseries, and so they get a bunch of tech people together and they talk about the future of the industry. They had one of their guys who works in business development, Kris Lengieza, I hope I got his name right. You'll know because he says it himself in the interview coming up. He talked mostly about robots and about how robotics is becoming a platform rather than just a specific thing. And I've heard this example used before. China's working on drywall hanging robots, and he's like, well, I think that's an interesting tech demo, but I wouldn't want that thing on my crew. And there's a bunch of reasons for that. Like, it doesn't, limiting the thing to human, I should say it's a humanoid form robot. And he says that's not going to work as well as stuff like the Boston Dynamics quote-unquote dog robots that go around in sort of an autonomous path and carry tools around and then get in places people can't be. He says that kind of thing is going to be what happens in the future, and he says more of that in the interview. But there was also a panel with him, actually not him, with Jez Surratt from Procore and then a bunch of other people who from in town, various construction leaders, and they talked about their biggest problem is that they've gone from having too little data or having to do it by hand manually, and people being, in a trailer for 15 hours, to now they've got too much data. Like, they're deluged with the stuff, and they got to figure out how to, and they've gotten to the point where they're now hiring people to analyze this data and figure out what insights they can glean and then fix their sort of scheduling, and one of the things they said is that this will actually address the labor concerns in some ways. One guy was saying that they have too many PMs and supers on site just because there's all this error correction happening, and then getting this data and then analyzing it would sort of correct for that.
Yeah.
Which is interesting. And also they said, and this is something I'd noticed, that all these construction platforms in terms of software are becoming more, they're sharing amongst each other, and before they never did. It was always like buy XYZ's software, and then it just became, and this happened with, let's say Windows and Macs too. Like back in the day, it was the same thing. You either buy this or you buy that, and that's what you go with. And now everything sort of works together, and that's happening in construction now too, which is helping them. The other thing I went to is I went to the Wood Solutions Fair, and one of the most interesting sessions they had was a session on what UK wood what the UK is doing with wood, and they're a little bit ahead of us in terms of the stuff they're building, but they have a bunch of factors that are keeping them behind now. Architect Harbinder Birdie was there. He was a very funny guy, which doesn't come across as well in the interview as it did in the session, where he was just off the cuff, make fun of Boris Johnson and such, and talk about his hatred for lawyers. But anyway,
so topical.
Going on from that, he said, interestingly, because of Brexit, or the impending, specter of it anyway, you can't get, like, most of the skilled workers are Eastern European, or from Poland, and those are the guys, and these are super highly skilled people who now are like, well, I might as well just go somewhere else because I'm not wanted here, and so that means you've got this. They have their own labor shortage, kind of their own making, so those guys take off, and they've got nobody to replace them. He said wood might allow to address some of that, because one of the reasons people don't want to work is because it's out in the cold. Well, if you're working in a factory on prefab stuff, which a lot of wood is,
much more controlled.
Exactly, much more controlled. Yeah. It's not as big a deal. Besides that, he also talked about how with young people, they are not going to put up with a large carbon footprint, which is what cement or concrete has. So if they want to start a startup, they're going to more or less demand, or at least prefer, a wood environment. So that's going to encourage building of wood. But right now there's less of that because of the Grenfell Tower tragedy, which actually has nothing to do with wood. It got caught. What happened is it caught on fire, and the fire went up the cladding. But because of that, everybody is very gun shy of building anything tall in the UK.
It's a public relations problem.
More or less, yeah. It's because then you're building something that could potentially be another Grenfell. So he said this is a thing that in a couple of years will work itself out.
Kind of the Chernobyl.
But you're not going to see But you're not going to see a Brock Commons anytime soon.
Yeah.
Or you might see it soon, but not immediately. It's interesting too, because it's kind of the opposite in a lot of ways of what our problems are, and also in terms of trees, they need to get trees from Scandinavia. They don't have anything but oak and they can't really use that for anything complex. So that's another thing that Brexit gets to them. Whereas we've got a tree. I'm looking outside. There's a million trees in front of me.
Well, we also have a lot of like pine wood beetle damage.
Yeah. But we can use that.
We can use it. There's a lot of like different wood products that we can create. So yeah,
we just have much more land mass in England, obviously. So up next, you will listen to Kris Lengieza, and after that, we'll listen to Harbinder Birdie.
This feature interview is brought to you by the Ontario Sewer and Water Main Construction Association, Ontario's champion for sustainable and safe water and sewer infrastructure.
I'm here at Procore's Connectseries in Burnaby with
Kris Lengieza, Director of Business Development for the Marketplace at Procore.
And he delved into some of the technology issues that we're facing today and tomorrow. So I'd like to start with the most glamorous one, robots, which he was described as kind of a plus, not a plus and a minus, but a plus and then another thing we need, but for different reasons than we think, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. I think robots coming to construction is a very interesting topic, right? So we talk about the labor shortage that we have, and everybody wants to jump right to robots actually coming out in the field and putting in place work. Where I actually think that robots are going to show up immediately and are already starting to show up is in the data collection scenario, right? So having someone actually go out in the field and actually collect that information, take photos, collect concrete samples, then it's going to be things like move material around, right? We already see autonomous trucking, we're seeing vehicles move around. How are materials going to get to the job site and then get moved around the job site using those autonomous vehicles? And then lastly, we'll finally, I think, start to see things come to the job site to actually put work in place, right? There's a lot of people investing in this technology, and where we see it really grabbing hold quickly is around definitely capturing information, then delivering materials, and I think the actual putting in place of work will have an effect longer term in the future.
And you also mentioned, and this is kind of why didn't I think of this as obvious, as things go more modular, then it makes more sense than
Absolutely.
It does say in the field.
Yeah, absolutely. when you start to talk about bringing more and more of the construction operations into a factory setting, then it makes a lot more sense for robots to be involved, right? Because now you can set up an assembly line and you can have things work on something that's moving and have the robots be stationary, right? They're in a controlled environment. They have good connectivity. They have good controls. You can pre-train them to their environment. All of the troubles that we have of putting them on a job site because everything is so unique and so disconnected aren't a problem as we work in the factory. And you're already starting to see this if you look at like the MEP fabricators of the world. They're using a lot of robotics in their sheet metal cutting, in their pipe, work, and a lot of those things that are happening in their shops are driven by robotics. Mm-hmm. So it's not that robotics aren't in construction, it's just that we're just not looking at it the same way that maybe the rest of the industry is looking at it.
Yeah, I talked to one, and you actually cited this drywall hanging robot that they're working on in China. I talked to a guy at a convention in Nashville, and he said, why would you design a robot to do exactly what a human does? That seems rather limiting. And like you said, I don't want this thing on my team, but it does point to where this is going. Yeah. Like with the Boston Dynamics dog robots and stuff.
Yep, absolutely. I mean, I think what's really interesting is you think about the robots that are being built like the Boston Dynamics. It's being built as a platform. Mm-hmm. So people can figure out what to do with it once they can get it out on the job site and moving around and then extend off of it. And I think that's what we're really going to see is that people are going to break down the mold of like, hey, I need to build something that lifts a sheet of drywall, puts it up against the wall and screws it in. Maybe it doesn't have to be a humanized
People
style.
might be better at that.
Right, people might be better at that task. But moving material, like, okay, cool, drywall typically sits on skids. Having a robotic forklift that just moves around the job site and can avoid people and move materials that are heavy and maybe move more than a human can, that makes a lot of sense.
Amazon already does that.
Yeah, Amazon does that in their warehouses all the time. Absolutely.
And you also said on the human side of things, there's this labor shortage, but you can also have guys who've been in the field for 40 years, maybe they sit in a desk and they're training people on how to do this stuff, or they can see a problem others wouldn't with AR. And also, you cited one guy who just learned all the technology and became indispensable, and he's a younger guy.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's really two sides to that, right? The technology is a great new opportunity for new people entering the industry, right? It's interesting. It's fun. It's like things that they like to do, like video games. We all live in a digital world, so they're like, I come to construction and it's so undigitized, right? Mm-hmm. So if we can take this technology and put it in front of them and be like, this is how we're building in the future, you're still going to need to learn how things go together and how we've built traditionally because it informs how you use these tools. Mm-hmm. But then if you go the other way and it's like, okay, now we have all of these people leaving the industry, right? Because they've worked very hard for many years, they have 30, 40 years in, and they just don't want to or just can't do it anymore, right? How do we get that knowledge out of them and train others? And the technology can be a great bridge between those generations and really start to do some bi-directional mentoring of teaching an older construction person how to use technology and that older person teaching or more seasoned person teaching a younger person how to actually build. And that's what's really important.
And one other thing, my final question is that you talked about how technology and how that's going to break down the silo problem that we still have.
Yep, absolutely. I think one of the biggest challenges that the industry has had is we've all taken so much data, but we kind of hoarded it all to ourselves, right? We all thought that was the best way to get an advantage. And what we're realizing now is that with so much, we've all adopted our own little technology spin and our own little stack, and we're not gaining any efficiency. The only way that we're going to gain that efficiency is by breaking down those silos and eliminating the double entry, sharing one data set in the middle where everybody can have access to the same information and move more quickly. And then lastly, it's, okay, now can we make those things work together and automate so much of these processes that in reality are just there because it's the way we've always done it before. And if we can break down those kind of two things, the silos and the mentality of we have to do it the same way we've always done it, then I think we are in well positioned for some big changes to come in our industry for sure.
Okay, thanks. I'm here at the Wood Solutions Conference with
Harbinder Beedie, partner at Hawkins Brown Architects.
And he's just talked about how CLT and timber generally is being used in England. And one of the things you started with was the various myths, I'm sure they happen here too, about why you can't use CLT or why people don't want to use CLT. So maybe you can run through some of the bigger ones.
I think some of the bigger ones is one about Generally combustibility. I think if you work with the right design team in terms of like risk mitigation and understanding where some of the main structural components are, especially load bearing with timber, then we believe that it's a material that can be used. And what we're finding more and more is that a lot of the structures that we're using are hybrid structures. So you'd have concrete elements, steel, etc., that allow for some of the stability within the structure. And then the timber construction is almost a way of reducing your carbon footprint.
Mm-hmm. And you also said that in some ways, I mean, it's a different material anyway, but you also have to sort of think differently about how you're going to build. You can't. It's more modular. It's more sort of front-loaded, I guess.
Yeah, and I think the key thing is very much making sure that the client is aware that there needs to be a lot more research and design and coordination with all of the design and the construction team up front. Mm-hmm. And in the main, because your installation is going to be reduced massively. And the bigger challenge at the moment is actually finding people that are willing to work on site. You know, the construction industry has a real lack of skilled labour, because that is the thing that is very mobile. And so design it up front, spend more time, invest and get paid for doing the design, and that should pay dividends when it comes to the assembly of the construction.
And you said, and this is less of a concern here, but we've got our own challenges with the States and the USMCA thing, that Brexit actually affects us, not just in the ways you think, but like in terms of labour that's now going home and people who don't want to work, like you said, and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, it is. And I think there is such a skill shortage within the construction industry, and also with free movement, historically, lots of the construction industry was in a way buoyed by the labour that was coming from Eastern Europe. And these are highly skilled workers. And if they're not wanted, or if there isn't the work, or there are other places within Europe where there is a better offer, then those labourers will go. And hence that's why British construction companies are now investing in design for manufacture, assembly, essentially factories that are able to make components for buildings efficiently without the need for excessive labour.
And one other thing, you mentioned that Grenfell Tower, even though it has nothing to do with actual timber construction, it did sort of cast this shadow over the industry.
Yeah, it did. And I think what's happening now more and more is that various developers, local authorities, commissioning clients are very risk about anything that is flammable. Since Grenfell, and the whole industry, including insurers and building control officers, they're very nervous about assuring or approving or accepting designs for buildings that might have combustible components in it. So I think what will happen now is that for the next couple of years is that people will be a lot more conservative about using timber, and hence use very non-combustible materials, hence concrete. But the carbon footprint of concrete is phenomenal. So I think it will take us back a couple of years, but what we're hoping is that we'll be able to somehow integrate timber as a low carbon option, because it's one of the only ways that we're going to be able to have a fighting chance of meeting our 2050 targets. Because apparently 45% of all carbon is generated from the construction industry. So if we can use timber that captures carbon, and we can use it as a construction material, that has to be the way forward.
You said that a youth won't, let's say 20 years down the road, they won't rent something if it doesn't have a proper rating.
Because I think just like everybody now, there's some sort of like there's some sort of like prestige about having like a Lexus or a hybrid car, because what you're doing is that you're saying that I'm consuming less carbon, and I think developers and landlords will want to promote the fact that they have a building that is the most efficient it can be. And for young people who are having a startup company, etc., ethically, that's what they want to be. And if they're becoming vegan because they're trying to reduce their carbon footprint, if they're flying less, the chance that if they've got a team of 15, they will be in an office that consumes the lowest amount of carbon, because it is part of their ideology, unlike maybe 20 years ago.
Okay, thank you.